And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. So this year we're hearing a lot about government efficiency. Politicians everywhere are saying we need to do more with less. Well, my next guest has won praise for improving the Rochester-Genesee Regional Transportation Authority in lean economic times. Mark Aesch is the CEO of RGRTA, and he has written a book about how the agency went from having nearly $28 million in debt back in 2004 to turning annual profits. The book is called Driving Excellence, and Mark Aesch is joining us from Rochester this evening. Hi, how are you?
I'm terrific. Thank you, Liz.
It's good to see you. So I want to get started before we talk about the book. You also have been, in doing the promotion for the book, talking a little bit about fascinating topic that is government consolidation, sort of, right? Which dovetails with
absolutely.
Which dovetails with Governor Cuomo's, one of Governor Cuomo's big priorities. And one of the things that you've said lately is that there should be sort of like an Uber MTA, like a big upstate transit authority. Is that correct?
It is. I think one of the things I would refer to it a little different than maybe a big upstate MTA. We'd like to think that it could be done, with the similar management principles that we've employed here at RGRTA. But it's one of those where, as you look across upstate and you see a transit authority with all of the staffing that goes with that in Albany and Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo, clearly consolidating them into one upstate transit system makes an awful lot of sense from an efficiency perspective.
And wouldn't that, though, be difficult to accomplish because you have a situation where everybody likes to control their own fiefdom?
Yeah, I think that there's no question that we're in a situation where people like to do those things. But the reality is, with the economic conditions which we face today, and you look at the results that we've been able to achieve here in Rochester, where we've actually cut fares, as you mentioned, now run surpluses for 5 consecutive years, and actually reduce our reliance on taxpayer subsidies, I think if you built the right model, clearly you could put the right management practices in place and save the taxpayers, I would argue, tens of millions of dollars a year by combining that into one very efficient system.
Well, efficient system, that's probably the key phrase there, because when I make the comparison to the MTA, but it's probably not apt, because the MTA, which of course is the Metropolitan Transit Authority that's down in the city running the New York City subway system and also the buses, has been sort of chronically short of money and constantly coming up to Albany and asking for cash. And so you don't want to have a situation like that one, obviously. When you write about in your book and you talk about efficiency for transit, I mean, what do you think is the #1 point that people are missing, particularly just in other places, perhaps New York City, but elsewhere, when they are running deficits and having a difficult time keep going back to fare hikes to cover their deficit?
Yeah, your point, I think, is spot on. It's one of those where we hear elected officials, of both sides talk, kind of give speeches and talk about how we need to run government more like a business. What we've done differently over the last 7 years now is, instead of giving speeches about how to run it more like a business, we've actually rolled up our sleeves and actually run it like a business. And I think one of the fundamental pieces that you get into is so many people, particularly in the government world, look at providing a service to a particular community. What we've worked very, very hard to do is to provide a product. And I think when you change your thinking so that you're not offering a service where you almost have a take-it-or-leave-it approach to putting buses out on the street, but take an attitude of delivering a product to the marketplace, suddenly then you're thinking about efficiency. For example, we've been able to actually cut our fares, but we've been able to increase the amount of revenue we pick up in each mile that we drive by 95%. Imagine that. Cut fares, but increase the amount of revenue that you pick up by 95%. And that's been able to do exactly the point that you were making. Rather than putting our hand out, asking for more money from Albany, we've actually reduced our reliance on taxpayer subsidies by 33%.
Also, though, I don't know that necessarily, particularly when you're in upstate communities, obviously we're not talking about a place where they have subway systems, vast subway systems. I know there are small things, like in Buffalo has, for example, the rail that runs, through downtown. And then, of course, there's the trains, which we'll get to in a second. But the bus, ridership generally in some areas upstate is down. I mean, how do you get people to ride?
Well, I think a lot of that comes from having the right mindset. I'll give you just a quick example. We held a news conference years ago, and it was a fundamental news conference for us, where we announced that we were no longer going to pick up passengers. And people sort of looked at us and said, "You're a public transportation system. You need to pick up passengers." And what we announced is that we were going to begin to pick up customers. And the shift in thinking of saying we're no longer going to put this service out on the street to pick up passengers, but instead we're going to provide a product for customers to buy. That difference in thinking is so fundamental, which is why in Rochester our population is relatively stable, yet our ridership has increased more than 3 times the national average. If you're selling a product that customers want to buy, people will come buy it.
Okay, but all you do is change the verbiage and you actually manage to get people to think differently about buses?
No, boy, I wish it were that simple. No, clearly, I would call that, my phrase for that is to call that bumper sticker talk, where you just sort of slap it on a bumper sticker and you say, we're going to call them customers instead of passengers. No, you have to treat them like customers. For example, I think when you provide a service to passengers, it's a little bit of an attitude of take it or leave it. But when you offer a product to customers, suddenly you need to think of your buses as a store. It's just how we talk about it with our employees. And so if we have 400 stores moving around the community, we've got a bus driver who needs to think of themselves like a greeter would at Walmart. The store needs to open on time. Our on-time performance is now at 86%, something we've worked very, very hard to do. The stores need to be clean, and so we've worked to increase the cleanliness of the buses. We need to answer the phones faster in the call center. So it's all moving from picking up passengers to picking up customers. And to your point, you can't just call them different things. You need that fundamental change underneath to really make it be a product rather than a service.
I just want to ask you before we run out of time, you've gotten a lot of coverage for your book, which is called Driving Excellence, again, just to remind people. And it's, pardon me, sorry. Yes, I have that right? Driving Excellence, is that correct?
Yeah, Driving Excellence.
Okay, good. So it's this very end, you have this moment about former Rochester Mayor Bob Duffy, who is now, of course, the Lieutenant Governor, and the failure of Renaissance Square. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but I understand that the two of you now there's been a meeting of the minds on this.
Yeah, the way I describe it is obviously it was a tragic loss for our community. We wound up spending about $23 million to build nothing at the end of the day, which was very, very sad. But as I've described it, many times over, the now former mayor and current lieutenant governor, we sat down on Oprah's couch and we had a long talk about it. We didn't really sit on Oprah's couch, but we sat on his couch, and it was sort of a moment where we talked through what happened and why we lost all that money and why that project didn't happen. And we're now moving forward with building at least a transit center in the heart of our downtown. Because we have cut the fare, we have more people riding in Rochester, and so we're going to be building about a $50 million center, which Lieutenant Governor Duffy has been supportive of, and we're moving forward to the construction phase on that. It's one of those where it was a very tragic loss for the community, but happy that we're going to build something today. Okay,
and just again, in closing, this is 9 pages of a book that's actually 239 pages, so it's not the focus is not Renaissance Square, nor is it Bob Duffy and his responsibility for the failure of that project. But you've gotten a lot of coverage, so.
No, Yeah, I think your point is exactly right. The message of the book is how it is possible to have high-performing public agencies. That I think the message that Governor Cuomo was talking about, and you see the turmoil that Governor Walker is going about today in Wisconsin, we went through some of those struggles half a dozen years ago. But when you go through that process and you take the path that I think Governor Cuomo was talking about today, I couldn't have imagined that 6 years later I'd be sitting here talking to you saying we cut fares, we've run surpluses 5 years in a row, and we've actually reduced our reliance on taxpayer subsidies, but here we sit today. So it is possible, which is why I wrote the book, that we can have high-performing public agencies.
Well, I think that Governor Cuomo would be happy to hear that, because that is exactly something that he has said he wants to do. Mark Aesch, I want to thank you very much for joining us from Rochester. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Liz. You as well.